the fiery transformation of Renaissance Florence. Imagine you're strolling through the busy streets of Florence in the late 1400s, where artists are perfecting masterpieces, merchants are bustling in lively markets, and towering cathedrals glow under the Italian sun. You can practically smell fresh paint mixing with the aroma of roasted chestnuts. But on one fateful day, that vibrant atmosphere is replaced by the sound of crackling flames, cheers and cries echoing through the piazza, and clouds of dark smoke rising into the sky. This is the story of the Bonfire of the Vanities, the day Florence set its own beauty ablaze. It all starts with a question that might make you uneasy. What if someone convinced you that your makeup, your books, and even your art were sins that had to be destroyed? Not sold, not hidden away, but burned in a gigantic fire right in the heart of your city. That's exactly what happened on February 7th, 1497. A preacher named Girolamo Savonarola had stirred such powerful feelings among the people that they believed sacrificing their most cherished belongings was the only way to save their souls. It might sound extreme, but once you see the world through their eyes, where fear of divine wrath and hopes for redemption ran high, it starts to make a strange sort of sense. To really understand how Florence reached this boiling point, picture the city at the height of the Renaissance. It wasn't just a place on a map, it was the epicenter of creativity. Legendary figures like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo were already sketching and sculpting in studios across town. Wealthy families, especially the Medici, commissioned jaw-dropping works of art, showering talented painters with money and praise. Being a painter or a sculptor in Florence meant you were part of something extraordinary. There was an unspoken promise in the air that through art, humanity could rise above its limits. But underneath the marble sculptures and lively frescoes, trouble simmered. Politics in Florence were tense, and the city wasn't just some peaceful haven. It was full of deals, betrayals, and simmering rivalries. The Medici family's power was strong, but not unshakable. Religious fervor was also high, and many wondered if all these luxuries and celebrations were drawing them away from what really mattered, living a righteous life. That's when Savonarola, a Dominican friar, stepped into the spotlight with a voice that boomed through Florence's streets, warning of punishment for worldly excess. Savonarola didn't start out as the most popular preacher. In fact, when he first arrived in 1489, he struggled to draw a crowd. Yet as Florence's political climate grew restless, especially after Lorenzo de' Medici died in 1492, people began taking his predictions of doom more seriously. He spoke of God's judgment and painted a picture of Florence on the brink of catastrophe. His timing was uncanny. Around this period, France's King Charles VIII invaded Italy, and Savonarola presented it as divine retribution. Many believed God was indeed using foreign armies to punish the moral failings of their city and their neighbors. Once people started seeing him as a prophet, Savonarola's influence spread like wildfire. Overnight, his sermons began shaping daily life. Taverns shut down, luxurious parties dwindled, and a sense of somber piety weighed heavily over the city. Women were encouraged to dress modestly, games of chance were condemned, and there was a general push to cleanse anything viewed as leading to vanity or sin. It was as though an invisible line had been drawn. On one side, spiritual purity. On the other, anything that smelled of excess or pleasure. Then came the day that still sends chills down historians' spines. February 7th, 1497. The plan was to hold a massive bonfire in the city's main square, the Piazza della Signoria, where people would toss in objects they believed led them into temptation. But what started as a call to give up frivolities turned into a more dramatic spectacle than anyone could have imagined. Savonarola's devoted followers, called the Piagnoni, weepers, organized the event with meticulous care. Large wooden structures were piled high with countless items deemed sinful: mirrors, makeup, fancy clothing, musical instruments, gambling tables, and heartbreakingly, artworks and books. Onlookers crowded the square. Some came out of sheer curiosity. After all, when does an entire city publicly burn its treasures? Others showed up because they genuinely thought they were helping purge Florence of corrupt influences. Religious processions chanted prayers, and children, dressed in simple white robes, roamed the streets collecting anything considered luxurious or pagan. They knocked on doors, requesting valuables, and dragged them to the bonfire. Flames roared, and smoke filled the air, carrying with it the hopes and fears of a city trying desperately to cleanse itself. The destruction was staggering. Priceless paintings, sometimes rumored to include works by artists like Botticelli, were lost in minutes. Rare manuscripts, pieces of cultural heritage that can never be replaced, went up in smoke. The city that had prided itself on being the birthplace of modern art now fueled a fire that devoured its own pride and achievements. Some people cheered with a fanatic glow in their eyes. Others watched silently with tears streaming down their faces. Can you imagine standing there, torn between your reverence for God and the heartbreaking sight of your homeland's beauty turning to ash? Once the flames died down, a thick layer of unease fell over Florence. News spread across Italy and beyond, shocking scholars, collectors, and fellow artists. Many whispered that Florence's golden age was ending. The city's luminous spirit seemed to have burned away with the Vanities. But while Savonarola's followers believed this act would bring them divine favor, powerful individuals within Florence were deeply troubled. In their eyes, Savonarola had gone too far, and they were prepared to fight back. Savonarola's downfall came swiftly. The Pope at the time, Alexander VI, a member of the influential Borgia family, was not about to let some radical friar challenge the authority of the church and stir chaos in a major city. After a series of accusations and warnings, Savonarola was excommunicated and lost his remaining support from important figures. He tried to hold on to power, but the tide had turned against him. In 1498, just a year after the bonfire, an angry mob dragged him from his convent. The very flames he once controlled would now be his undoing. He was burned at the stake in the Piazza della Signoria, not far from where he had carried out his grand destruction. After everything was said and done, life in Florence moved on, but not without scars. The city had to rebuild its identity and piece together what remained of its cultural heritage. The bonfire of the Vanities became a defining moment, a painful memory of what happens when fervor overshadows balance. People realized that even the most righteous intentions could become dangerous when driven by fear and taken to extremes. If you're thinking this is just a distant piece of Renaissance gossip, consider the questions it raises for us today. Are we ever tempted to destroy or ban things we think are harmful, believing it's the only way to protect ourselves? It's a reminder that beliefs can be incredibly powerful, so powerful they might consume the very things that make us unique or bring us joy. It also highlights how easy it is for a group of people, under the right conditions, to turn on what they once cherished. In a modern sense, we might not see literal bonfires taking place in busy squares, but the urge to censor or erase ideas is still alive and well in many corners of our world. The story also underlines how delicate culture can be. Books, paintings, and sculptures aren't just objects. They're pieces of our collective story. When they vanish, we lose opportunities to learn from those who came before us. That's part of the reason why the bonfire of the Vanities still resonates. It's an age-old warning. Once something is burned or banned, it's often gone for good. Yet, there's a bittersweet side to this. Despite the horror of that day, Florence's artistic spirit managed to bounce back. New artworks were created, more brilliant minds came along, and the city continued to leave its mark on the world. The Renaissance didn't die with the bonfire of the Vanities, but the memory of that blaze served as a lesson in how quickly a cultural beacon can be dimmed by fear. You might wonder if an event like this could happen again. It might look different today. Maybe not a physical fire in a public square, but a collective push to silence or destroy something people consider morally or socially dangerous. We've seen it happen in subtle ways. Certain books get pulled from shelves, films or artworks are censored, and social movements sometimes call for the elimination of entire ideas. Whenever we're caught in a moment of moral panic, history can repeat itself if we're not careful. Picture yourself in the Piazza della Signoria now. Perhaps you're visiting Florence on a sunny afternoon. Tourists snap photos of statues, street performers juggle for spare change, and the medieval buildings stand tall. You'd never guess that over 5 centuries ago, the same space was filled with raging flames, and a crowd inspired by a mix of faith, fear, and desperation. Yet, if you pause for a moment, you might sense the echoes of that day and feel the weight of how easily beauty can be lost when people decide they must purge anything they deem unholy. So as we reach the end of this story, ask yourself, where do you draw the line between devotion and destruction? It's easy to think of these events as relics from a faraway past, but they still speak volumes about our impulses and the dangers of going too far in the name of a noble cause. If we don't learn from what happened in Florence, we risk letting similar flames ignite in our own time. If you want to explore more about this fascinating slice of history, you can find plenty of articles and books that dive deeper into Savonarola's life and the Renaissance world he tried to reform. Check the description in the first comment below for a few recommendations. And if hearing stories like this lights a spark in you, feel free to join me for more journeys into our past. A simple click to subscribe, like, or share helps keep these conversations going. By doing so, you're not only broadening your own horizons, but also helping others discover these lesser-known yet dramatic moments that shaped who we are today. Thank you for taking this trip with me into Florence's past. May the memory of that infamous bonfire remind us all of the value of creativity, the power of belief, and the fine line between renewing something and reducing it to ashes. Let's hold on tight to the brilliance we have and make sure it never goes up in smoke.